Welcome back everybody, and welcome to part 3 of the NES repair series. Probably the reason that most of you are watching this series in the first place. Today I'm going to go over the hardware repair of the NES. And what we've got in front of us here is the motherboard and the 72-pin connector. First thing we want to do is just go ahead and remove the 72-pin connector. So just grab the board and just rock it. Oh, whoa. That came off rather easy. That's not typical, we'll just say. Usually when you take these off, you have to just... They have a lot more force to get them off. But what you want to do is just rock it back and forth to get it off. They aren't just going to pop off like that generally. But yeah, for now I'm just going to set the 72-pin connector aside and talk about the motherboard real quick. So the first thing I like to do when I get these things apart is take a look at the board itself and just look over it for any defects. And what I'm looking for on this side anyways is you see all these little lines here that go along the bottom between the solder points, and these are what are called traces. In there are basically just little metal wires. It's basically what it is, going from different contact points on the board to allow the board components to communicate with each other. If one of these is severed because of whatever reason, I've seen them severed because people weren't careful with a screwdriver, it slipped and they cut a trace, or because of corrosion eating through traces, or whatever. But if these get severed in any way, it can cause all sorts of problems. So I like to hurry and look over and make sure there's none of that going on, because if there is, there are ways to fix that. A good channel that he does it a lot is Luke Morse's channel. But yeah, if it's something I ever run across, maybe I'll do a video of it. But yeah, on this one, everything looks good except for a few spots where there's a little bit of corrosion, which we'll clean up. And they'll clean up pretty easily. But then I also look at this capacitor here. Just look at it, make sure it's not bulging in any way. That's usually a sign of leakage. But then I'll flip it over, and here's kind of the busy side of it. And what I'm looking for here is any burn marks, because you can get resistors that have burned out, or different chips, whatever, and I don't see anything going on here. Everything looks good. Look for any bulging capacitors, leaking capacitors, anything like that, but everything looks fine to me. So I'm just going to go ahead and set this off to the side, and we'll get to the first part of this, which is let's take a look at the 72-pin connector, which I had said I could already see kind of what was wrong. And that was, there is one pin right here that it's corroded. I don't know why, but it's just that one pin, and it's actually kind of bad. But what I'm going to do first here before I address that is show you how to bend the pins back. There are two ways that people go about refurbishing these original connectors. And the first one, and most common one that I've seen, is to bend the pins back. Because what happens is, the theory is, over time, through inserting games and bending and pushing them down, the pins have weakened and they aren't getting good contact with the contacts on the game, and thus you have your read problems. And I mean, logically that makes sense, because if you think about it, say like a spring, think of the springs that hold your car up, your suspension springs. Just sitting there isn't fatiguing the spring. Springs are not fatigued by compression, they're fatigued by use. So compression and decompression over time will eventually weaken a spring. And that's kind of the principle in which people are saying is going, they perceive is going on here, what they think is happening. So what we're doing is we're bending the pins back up to get better contact with the cartridge contacts. But to do that, all I do is I get a small screwdriver, and what I do is I get underneath the pin in the front here. You just get on the side, because you can push these pins around. There's room to push them around in their little spots here. Just push it to the side here, and just get under the front and just ever so slightly bend it up. You don't want to bend it up too much, just enough, you know, just a little bit. And you're just going to want to do that with each pin here. That would take a while for me to show you on video, so I'm not going to sit here and bend up each one. But you just get underneath and just bend up. And it's just really that simple. Now, like I said, there is a second method, which is kind of a more recent development, which is boiling your 72-pin connector. I've never tried this. It's a very interesting concept. But basically what I've seen you do on the videos is you bring a pot of water up to a boil, you toss this in and let it boil for 5 minutes. Get a pair of tongs, pull it out, use some compressed air, blow out some of the water, grab a cartridge, and you insert it in and out like 15-20 times. Then take it and toss it back in for another 5 minutes. Pull it back out and basically let it cool, dry it out. I would definitely blow it out with an air compressor or a can of compressed air or something. But to me it just seems kind of weird, but you know, watching the videos, in the video it works. Whether or not that's actually what's going on, or if they're replacing the connector and they're saying, oh look, it magically works, I don't know. But you know, it's up to you. You can try that if you want. I suggest using a game you don't care about, or a double that you have, or a spare or something, or at the very least pulling it apart, drying it out, cleaning it after doing it, because the water is going to cause corrosion. You're definitely going to want to get all of the water out of the connector, out of the game, everything before you even think about using them again, or even letting them sit, just because water's full of minerals. Minerals cause corrosion. Maybe one thing to think about is try using distilled water. I don't know if that would have an effect, but yeah. So that's it. It's an interesting concept, but now I'm going to go over how I clean these pins. And what I like to use, people like to call it the credit card method, but you just get something that's the size of a credit card, and I put one of these anti-static cloths that I've showed you in the game cleaning video, and I've just folded it in half, so I've doubled it up. And then what I'm going to do is get some isopropyl. Just got an eyedropper here, makes it easier. And just wet the cloth on both sides. And then just insert ever so slightly. Unlike with other cartridge-based game systems that I've done, you can insert this all the way into the connector and pull it out to clean it. But with these, I found if you do that, it can pull the pins out. So be careful not to insert this all the way down in, or you may have some problems. And you can push that back, the pin back in. It's kind of a tricky process, but you can do it. But just be careful, and you won't have to deal with that at all. But that's basically how you clean it. As for this corrosion, this is the NES that I couldn't get to work properly. It was loading up games, but there were graphical glitches everywhere. And I am 99.9% sure it has to do with the corrosion on this one pin. So what I'm going to do is another thing you can try is a toothbrush. And just get it soaked with some isopropyl and just go like this. Clean it this way. To try that. For this corrosion, I am going to attempt to use something that, like some white distilled vinegar, maybe some lemon juice. Another effective thing is some water mixed with baking soda. Those all will help eat corrosion. Let's see if I can get that off. And let me go ahead and give that a try. Excuse me. And I will be right back. Alright, so I am back, and they don't seem to be working too well. It's gotten some of it off, but not all of it. So what I'm going to try is I'm just going to get that screwdriver again, and I'm going to try scraping the corrosion off. Now this corrosion is that kind of blue corrosion that you'll see like on contacts from leaking batteries on like your Game Boys and stuff like that. That's what this corrosion looks like, and it is coming off, but underneath unfortunately I am now getting a rust colored corrosion. So yeah, I don't know if this is going to work or not. This may prevent this NES from working at all, but yeah, there's not much I can do. I can keep trying to clean it, but this rust is really not coming off. The metal's pretty corroded. Which brings me to another good point, and this is one I did not cover in the other video that I did about these, and that is, I did say that I don't like replacement 72-pin connectors. They're generally cheap. They apply too much pressure to the cartridge contacts, and they have a tendency to be shit. I mean, to be honest with you, a lot of people I've heard of buying them on eBay have ended up with pin connectors that stop working after a few months. But the truth of the matter is they are a necessary evil, because sometimes these original connectors, no matter what you do, they're just borked. There's no way to fix them. If you try everything that I've mentioned in this video and your NES still won't work, chances are it's the pin connector. You're gonna have to replace it. If you've cleaned all your games the way I've showed you how, if you've tried to refurbish the 72-pin connector like I've showed you, and if you've done the things that I'm about to show you with the motherboard, and it still won't work, 99% of the time it's just going to be the fact that it's the 72-pin connector needs to be replaced. Beyond that, you have a problem on the motherboard. Whether it's a burst cap or a much deeper issue like I ran into with my last NES that I tried to refurbish, where corrosion had lifted the traces on the board and there was just no fixing. Well, I shouldn't say that. I could try to fix it, but it's just not worth my time, so it was a $7 NES, I'm not gonna mess with it. But anyway, I will test this out later to see if the connector is working. But for now, let's go on to the next part of the video, and let's take care of this board. First thing I'm going to do is blow off the dust, because there is some dust on here. Just get the dust off real quick. And now, like I said, there are some spots that have a little bit of corrosion here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get our dropper again, and I'm just going to get this toothbrush, and I'm just going to get a little bit of this ISO. My guess is this corrosion isn't bad enough to warrant anything more than this, and just get this ISO and just clean it off. Let's see. Some of it is proving to be a little bit more stubborn than I thought. In which case, I'm going to use some distilled white vinegar. It's lovely stuff that I just love how it smells. Not really. It stinks. High heaven. Let's see, where's there it is. I apologize, my card ran out of memory, but yeah, so basically just want to give it a scrub, get the corrosion off, and it looks like it's not very bad, but you know, now we just want to wipe up, and unfortunately we can't really wipe up so much, being that we've got all these pins from the chips poking through, but just go ahead and blotch around as best I can. Now, I'm just going to use this compressed air to get the rest of it. Now keep in mind, this is what I hate about these cans of air. I really would prefer to use an air compressor. Now, with the distilled vinegar, unlike isopropyl alcohol, it's not going to dry up very quickly. In fact, it's like water in the fact that it's going to take some time. But so now what I'm going to do is I've blown it off before I turn this on. It's dry. It looks like there's a lot of. That's honestly very strange, because that was not there before. White looking corrosion. I'm going to get another can of air. Now, what I was going to say is, even though it looks like I've gotten off all the liquid, I am not going to power this board on or test it or anything, you know, for at least a half hour to make sure it's dry. But the next thing I'm going to do is, it's not very necessary because really the 72-pin connector isn't removed from that very much, well, at all, since it was put on. So I'm just going to use some isopropyl. And, you know, since we got it off, we might as well, you know, clean it up. So I'm just going to get some isopropyl here and just go back and forth on the connector. Just make sure it's cleaned up. And there we go. Now, the next part of the hardware refurbish is you might run into another problem where your game loads, but then immediately resets. So you'll see the title screen very briefly, and then it will just restart immediately. This is being caused by the lockout chip. And there is a lockout chip on games from Nintendo. Well, all the licensed games have them. And this chip is looking for that corresponding chip on the cartridge. If it doesn't see it, it restarts the system. It's kind of an early form of copy protection for consoles. And basically, it is this chip right here. Some people call it the NES chip, but let's turn this around. And if you have the board here, you've got your RF box and the composite video box. You see these two capacitors here, and you've got your NES chip, the lockout chip, which is right here. It will say 1985 Nintendo on it. I'm just going to push this little guy out of the way because he's in the way of what I'm going to need to do. But you need to disable this chip. It will do nothing to affect how your Nintendo works, except for the fact that this will, your Nintendo will no longer flash the red light. The red light will no longer flash, regardless of whether or not the game works. It will not flash anymore. This will no longer keep a game from loading. Now, if your game isn't being loaded, this isn't your problem. People think, oh, well, that's going to solve my issue. No, this isn't going to solve your issue. If the game isn't loading, it's because the game needs to be cleaned, or the pin connector needs to be replaced or refurbished or whatever. If it's loading and then resetting, this is the problem. And since we've got it out, we might as well disable it because it's really of no use. And to disable it, we are going to disable it by removing the fourth pin. Pin 1 is right here. Let me actually try to get closer for you. Come on. I'm sorry, guys. This is my digital SLR, and it's just... There we go. Alright. Now you see this is pin 1 right here. So you're going to count 4 pins in. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're going to want to disable that pin right there. Do not disable any other pin. This is the pin you want to pull right there. So that's what we're going to do now. And I'm just going to use this screwdriver. And I'm going to get under this fourth pin here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just going to get behind it here. And I'm just going to pull it out from the chip. Alright. Now, as you can see, the pin has been pulled. There we go. And it's just that fourth pin right there. And now that chip is disabled. That will no longer be a problem. Alright. So that is basically what we do to refurbish the hardware part of the NES. And at this point, what you're going to want to do is just go ahead and reinstall 72-pin connector. If you have a new one, this is the time to put it on. Just same way we take it off, just back and forth, wiggle it back on. remember that this part is facing the top of the NES. This part is facing the bottom. This connector goes on the bottom of the NES. So you're going to want the portion that loads the game on this side of the NES. And now all we need to do is reassemble it, and I will be back tomorrow with that video, and we'll show you how to put it back together, which, like I said, may seem straightforward, but there is one thing that hangs some people up that I'll go over. But yeah, so we will see you with that video tomorrow. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments down below. And thanks for checking out the video, guys.